Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The screen door slammed shut with a bang as James stomped into the kitchen, his face twisted into a scowl. His little sister Jenny trailed behind, sniffling and wiping tears from her cheeks. "What's going on here?" their mother asked, looking up from the pile of bills spread across the kitchen table. "James called me a stupid crybaby girl again," Jenny wailed. "He said I can't play baseball with him and his friends because girls are too weak and emotional." Their mother's eyes narrowed as she turned to face her son. "James Michael Thompson, what have we told you about treating your sister that way? Apologize right now." "Sorry," James muttered, not sounding sorry at all. He glared at Jenny. "But it's true. Girls can't throw or catch as good as boys. It's just biology." "That is absolutely not true," his mother said firmly. "And even if there were differences, that's no excuse for being cruel to your sister. We've had this conversation too many times. I think you need to learn some empathy." James rolled his eyes. "Whatever. Can I go to Tim's house now?" His mother shook her head. "No, you're grounded for the weekend, and your father and I will be discussing an appropriate punishment when he gets home from work." "That's so unfair," James protested. "It's not my fault girls are oversensitive." "Go to your room," his mother ordered, pointing toward the stairs. "I don't want to hear another word out of you until dinner." James stomped up to his room, slamming the door behind him. He flopped onto his bed with a huff, stewing in anger and resentment. It wasn't fair that he got in trouble just for stating facts. Girls were weaker and more emotional. Everyone knew that. Why did he have to pretend otherwise just to spare their feelings? He heard the muffled sounds of his parents' voices downstairs as his father arrived home from work. Great. Now he was really in for it. His dad always took Mom's side when it came to stuff like this. A short while later, there was a knock at his bedroom door.
"Come in,"
James grumbled. His parents entered, wearing matching stern expressions.
"Your mother told me what happened earlier,"
his father began.
"This behavior toward your sister has got to stop, James. We've tried talking to you, grounding you, taking away privileges, but nothing seems to be getting through. So we've decided to try a different approach," his mother continued. "Since you seem to have such a low opinion of girls, maybe it's time you walked a mile in their shoes, literally."
James sat up, frowning in confusion.
"What do you mean?" "We're sending you to stay with Grandma Beatrice for a few weeks," his father explained. "She's agreed to help teach you a lesson about respecting girls and women."
"Grandma B? But she lives like 3 hours away. What about school?" James protested. "We've arranged for you to do your schoolwork remotely," his mother said. "This is more important than a few weeks of in-person classes. You leave tomorrow morning." James's jaw dropped. "Tomorrow? But that's not fair. I have plans this weekend." "You should have thought of that before you treated your sister so poorly," his father said firmly. "This isn't up for debate. Pack your bags. You'll be gone for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer depending on your attitude and progress." With that, they left the room, closing the door behind them. James stared at the wall in shock. This had to be some kind of joke. They couldn't really be shipping him off to Grandma's house as punishment, could they? But the next morning, he found himself unceremoniously bundled into the car for the long drive to his grandmother's house in rural Pennsylvania. His protests and arguments fell on deaf ears. "This is for your own good," his mother insisted as they pulled up to the quaint farmhouse. "Try to keep an open mind and really listen to what Grandma has to teach you." James scowled and slouched lower in his seat. He doubted his stuffy old grandma had anything worthwhile to teach him. This was going to be the worst 2 weeks ever. Grandma Beatrice was waiting on the porch as they drove up, a stern look on her weathered face. She was a tall, imposing woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her sharp eyes seemed to bore right through James as he reluctantly climbed out of the car. "Well, young man," she said, her voice crisp, "I hear you've been giving your sister a hard time. We'll soon put a stop to that nonsense." James mumbled a sullen greeting, already hating everything about this situation. His parents said their goodbyes, his mother giving him a hug that he half-heartedly returned. And then, the car was pulling away, leaving James alone with his grandmother. "Bring your bags inside," Grandma B instructed. "Then meet me in the sewing room upstairs. We have work to do." Dragging his feet, James lugged his suitcase up to the spare bedroom. The floral wallpaper and lace doilies covering every surface made him wrinkle his nose in distaste. This place was like something out of the previous century. With a deep sigh, he trudged up another flight of stairs to the sewing room in the attic. Grandma B was waiting, surrounded by racks of clothing and shelves piled high with fabric and sewing supplies. "Stand up straight," she ordered as soon as he entered. "Arms out to the sides." Confused, James did as she asked. His grandmother circled him slowly, eyeing him up and down with a critical gaze. She pulled out a tape measure and began taking his measurements, muttering to herself as she worked. What exactly are you doing?" James asked warily. "Taking your measurements," Grandma B replied, matter-of-factly. "Can't make properly fitted clothes without them." James's eyes widened. "Make clothes? What clothes?" His grandmother fixed him with a stern look. "Your parents explained the situation to me. You seem to
Think being a girl is somehow inferior or shameful. So, for the next 2 weeks, you're going to live as a girl. Maybe then you'll develop some empathy and understanding." James gaped at her in horror. "What? No way! You can't be serious!" "I'm always serious," Grandma B said firmly. "Now let's see what we have that might fit you." She began rifling through the racks of clothing, pulling out various dresses and skirts. James backed away, shaking his head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. I refuse to wear girl clothes. You can't make me." His grandmother turned to face him, one eyebrow raised. "Oh? And just how do you plan to stop me? Your parents have given me full authority here. You can cooperate and learn something, or you can fight me every step of the way and make this a miserable experience for both of us. But one way or another, you will be dressing and living as a girl for the duration of your stay. The choice of how difficult to make it is up to you." James opened and closed his mouth, at a loss for words. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of weird nightmare. But, as Grandma B began laying out an assortment of feminine clothing, the reality of the situation started to sink in. He was trapped here, hours from home, with no way to contact his friends, and his parents had apparently signed off on this insane plan. I won't do it," he said weakly, his voice cracking. "You can't force me to wear that stuff." "Force you? Goodness, no!" Grandma B replied calmly. "But if you refuse to cooperate, I'm afraid you'll have to stay in your room. No TV, no phone, no computer. Just you and 4 walls until you decide you're ready to participate in this learning experience." James's shoulders slumped in defeat. As much as the thought of wearing girls' clothes horrified him, the idea of being stuck alone in that frilly bedroom for days on end was even worse. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll do it, but I won't like it." "That's the spirit," his grandmother said dryly. "Now let's get you changed. We'll start with something simple." The next hour was pure torture for James, as Grandma B helped him into various articles of feminine clothing. He cringed as silky undergarments slid against his skin.
His face burned with humiliation as she zipped him into a flowery sundress, and he nearly bolted when she brought out a pair of low heels. "I can't walk in those," he protested. "Nonsense. If millions of women can do it, so can you," Grandma B said firmly.
"It just takes practice."
By the time she declared him finished, James felt utterly ridiculous. The dress swished around his legs in a way that made his skin crawl. The bra strap dug uncomfortably into his shoulders, and the shoes pinched his toes something awful. "There now," Grandma B said, stepping back to survey her handiwork. "That's not so bad, is it? Come take a look." She led him to a full-length mirror in the corner of the room. James's jaw dropped as he stared at his reflection. With his slender build and delicate features, the transformation was shockingly convincing. If he didn't know better, he might have mistaken himself for an actual girl. "I look stupid," he mumbled, face flushing red. "You look lovely," his grandmother corrected. "Now let's work on your walk and posture. No slouching." For the rest of the afternoon, Grandma B drilled James on proper ladylike deportment: how to sit, how to stand, how to walk gracefully in heels. By dinner time, his feet were aching and his head was spinning. "We'll work on makeup tomorrow," Grandma B announced as they sat down to eat. "For now, just focus on using your utensils delicately. Small bites, elbows off the table." James picked at his food sullenly. This was beyond humiliating. He couldn't believe his parents had agreed to this insanity. Didn't they realize how traumatizing this could be? That night, as he lay in bed wearing a frilly nightgown, Grandma B had confiscated all his regular clothes. James resolved that he would find a way to escape this nightmare. He'd run away if he had to, anything to avoid 2 weeks of this torture. But, as the days passed, James found himself slowly adjusting to his new routine, much to his dismay. Grandma B kept him so busy with lessons on makeup, hairstyling, and proper feminine etiquette that he barely had time to plot an escape. And to his shock, he discovered that some aspects of being a girl weren't quite as awful as he'd imagined. The clothes, while still strange, became less uncomfortable as he got used to them. He even found himself admiring how some of the dresses looked on him, though he'd never admit it out loud. And there was something oddly satisfying about mastering the art of walking gracefully in heels. One afternoon, about a week into his stay, Grandma B announced they were going into town to run some errands. "But people will see me!" James protested, gesturing down at the modest skirt and blouse he was wearing. "That's rather the point," his grandmother replied. "You need to experience how the world treats young women. Now come along, Jamie. We don't want to be late." James cringed at the feminine version of his name that Grandma B had taken to using. But he obediently followed her out to the car, his stomach churning with anxiety. As they walked down the small town's main street, James was hyper-aware of every glance in his direction. He kept his eyes down, certain that at any moment someone would point and laugh, exposing him as a boy in disguise. But to his amazement, no one seemed to give him a second look. They simply saw what appeared to be a shy teenage girl out shopping with her grandmother. That is, until they passed a group of rowdy teenage boys loitering outside the drugstore. James felt their eyes on him immediately, making his skin crawl. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you ditch Granny and come hang with us?" one of them called out. "Yeah, we'll show you a good time," another added with a leer. James hunched his shoulders, speeding up his pace. He'd never felt so uncomfortable in his life. Is this what girls had to put up with all the time? Grandma B glared at the boys. "Mind your manners, young men," she said sharply, "or I'll be having a word with your parents." The boys subsided, grumbling, but James could feel their eyes on him until they turned the corner. He let out a shaky breath. "Are you all right, dear?" Grandma B asked gently. James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was reeling. He'd always thought girls were just being dramatic when they complained about stuff like that, but experiencing it firsthand, it was awful. He felt exposed, vulnerable, almost afraid. As they continued their errands, James found himself noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way some men's gazes lingered a bit too long. How the shopkeeper talked down to him, assuming he didn't know anything about the products they were buying. The constant low-level wariness he felt walking down the street alone. By the time they returned home, James was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He collapsed onto his bed, mind whirling. "Everything all right, Jamie?" Grandma B asked from the doorway. "You've been awfully quiet since we got back." James hesitated, then sat up.
I never realized," he said softly. "Is it always like that for girls, having to be on guard all the time?" His grandmother's expression softened. "Often, yes. Not always to that degree, but it's something most women learn to be aware of from a young age." James thought about all the times he'd dismissed his sister's complaints about boys at school making her uncomfortable. He'd always told her she was overreacting, to just ignore it. Now he felt a twinge of guilt. "I think I'm starting to understand some things," he admitted, reluctantly. "But I still don't get why girls make such a big deal about stuff like doing their hair and makeup. It seems like a waste of time to me."
Grandma B chuckled. "Well then, I think it's time for your next lesson. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about societal expectations and the pressure women face to always look presentable. You might be surprised by what you learn." As she left the room, James flopped back onto the bed with a groan. He had a feeling the next week was going to involve a lot more uncomfortable realizations. But as much as he hated to admit it, maybe this experience wasn't entirely pointless after all. The following days brought a whirlwind of new experiences and insights for James. Grandma B continued his education on the realities of life as a woman, covering topics from workplace discrimination to the tampon tax. With each passing day, James found his preconceived notions about gender roles and femininity being challenged and dismantled. One afternoon, they tackled the issue of body image and societal beauty standards. Grandma B spread out a selection of women's magazines on the kitchen table. "Take a look through these," she instructed. "Tell me what you notice about the women in the photos." James flipped through the glossy pages, frowning slightly. "They're all really thin," he observed. "And pretty. Perfect skin, shiny hair. Exactly." Grandma B nodded. "Now, how do you think it feels for the average woman to be constantly bombarded with these images of perfection?" James thought about it, remembering how his sister and her friends were always complaining about their appearance. He'd always thought they were just being vain or fishing for compliments. But now, "I guess it would make you feel not good enough?" he ventured hesitantly. "Precisely," his grandmother said. "Many women and girls struggle with poor self-image because they're constantly comparing themselves to an impossible standard, and society reinforces the idea that a woman's worth is tied to her appearance." James squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. He thought about all the times he'd made comments about girls' looks, good and bad. Had he been contributing to that pressure without realizing it? "But that's stupid," he blurted out. "There's more important stuff than how you look." Grandma B smiled. "You're absolutely right. But it's not always easy to remember that when you're constantly being judged on your appearance. Which brings us to our next topic, the time and effort women are expected to put into their looks." She set a basket filled with various cosmetics and hairstyling tools on the table. You've been getting a crash course in using these over the past week." James eyed the basket of beauty products warily. He'd slowly gotten more comfortable with the basic makeup routine Grandma B had taught him, but some of the items still mystified him. "Today, we're going to do a full face of makeup and style your hair," Grandma B announced. "I want you to time how long it takes." With a resigned sigh, James began the process. Foundation, concealer, powder, blush, eyeshadow, eyeliner, mascara, lip liner, lipstick, lip gloss. Each step required careful application and blending. By the time he finished his face, nearly 45 minutes had passed. "This is ridiculous!" he grumbled as he started on his hair. "Who has time for this every day?" "Many women make the time," Grandma B replied, "because they feel they have to in order to be taken seriously or considered professional. Think about the different standards for men and women in the workplace. A man can roll out of bed, throw on a suit, and be considered presentable. But a woman is often expected to have perfect hair, makeup, and nails just to be seen as put together." James frowned as he wrestled with the curling iron. He thought about how his mom always got up extra early to get ready for work, while his dad was usually out the door in 20 minutes. "I guess I never really thought about it before," he admitted. "It doesn't seem fair." "It's not," Grandma B agreed. "And that's not even considering the cost of all these products and tools. The pink tax on women's personal care items means they often pay more for essentially the same products marketed to men." As James finished styling his hair, a process that took another 30 minutes, he shook his head in disbelief. "Over an hour just to get ready? That's insane!" "And yet, many women do it every day," his grandmother pointed out. "Often while also getting children ready for school, preparing breakfast, and handling other household tasks." James slumped in his chair, feeling drained just thinking about it. How do they manage it all? Practice, mostly. And a lot of pressure to meet societal expectations, Grandma B said. Which brings us to our next lesson, multitasking and the mental load women often carry. For the rest of the afternoon, Grandma B had James juggling multiple tasks at once, folding laundry while memorizing a grocery list, planning a week's worth of meals while dusting the living room, making phone calls to schedule appointments while ironing clothes. "This is impossible!" James protested as he dropped a stack of freshly folded towels while trying to remember what day to schedule a dentist appointment. "How is anyone supposed to keep track of all this?" "Welcome to the world of the mental load," Grandma Bea said dryly. In many households, even when both partners work outside the home, women still tend to be the ones keeping track of all the little details that keep a family running smoothly. Remembering birthdays, scheduling doctor's appointments, knowing when you're running low on toilet paper. James thought about how his mom was always the one reminding everyone of upcoming events, making sure permission slips got signed, and keeping the household stocked with necessities. He'd never really considered how much mental energy that must take. "I'm starting to get why Mom always seems stressed," he muttered. "Exactly," Grandma Bea nodded. "It's not just about the physical tasks, but the constant mental juggling and planning. And society often takes it for granted that women will handle these things." As the day wore on, James found himself mentally and physically exhausted from trying to keep up with everything. By dinner time, he was more than ready to collapse into bed. But Grandma B had one more lesson in store. "Since you did such a lovely job with your hair and makeup earlier, we're going out to dinner," she announced. James groaned. "Do we have to? I'm exhausted." But that's part of the lesson," his grandmother said with a wink. "Sometimes women are expected to look put together and be on, even when they're tired or not feeling their best. Now let's touch up your makeup and find you a nice outfit." An hour later, James found himself perched uncomfortably on a chair at a nice restaurant, hyper-aware of his appearance and surroundings. He felt like everyone was staring at him, judging how he looked, how he sat, how he ate. "Relax," Grandma B murmured. "You look lovely, but try to smile more. Women are often told they should smile to be more appealing." James attempted a weak smile, but inside he was seething. He was exhausted, his feet hurt from the heels, and now he was supposed to look happy about it? This whole experience was becoming increasingly frustrating. As they waited for their food, a middle-aged man at a nearby table caught James's eye and winked. James quickly looked away, feeling his face heat up with discomfort and anger. "Creep," he muttered under his breath. "Unfortunately, that's something many women deal with regularly," Grandma B said softly. "Unwanted attention, feeling objectified, it can be very wearing." James stabbed at his salad viciously. "How do you stand it? All of it. The pressure, the expectations, the creeps. It's exhausting." His grandmother reached across the table to pat his hand gently. "It's not easy, but women find ways to support each other, to push back against unfair expectations, to carve out space for themselves, and hopefully, by educating people, especially young men like yourself, about these issues, we can start to change things for the better." As they finished their meal and headed home, James found himself lost in thought. He was seeing the world through new eyes now, noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way the waitress's smile became fixed and uncomfortable when a patron made a crude joke. How the women they passed on the street walked with keys clutched between their fingers as a makeshift weapon. The subtle ways people treated him differently when they saw him as female. It was eye-opening, and more than a little overwhelming. But James was starting to understand why his parents had sent him on this strange journey of discovery. He had a lot to think about, and a lot to apologize for when he got home. The next morning, James woke up feeling conflicted. On one hand, he was starting to understand and even appreciate some aspects of the female experience. On the other, he was desperately missing his normal clothes, his friends, and the ease of just being himself, without constantly second-guessing every action and appearance choice. Grandma B seemed to sense his mood as he trudged down to breakfast, still in his frilly nightgown. "Chin up, dear," she said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him. "We've got an interesting day ahead. I think you're ready for some more advanced lessons." James perked up slightly at that. "Advanced how?" "Well, we've covered a lot of the surface-level experiences of being a woman. Today, we're going to dig a bit deeper into some of the more complex social and emotional aspects." After breakfast, Grandma B had James change into comfortable clothes, still feminine, but more casual than the dresses and skirts he'd been wearing. They settled into the living room, where she had laid out a selection of books, magazines, and printed articles. "Let's start by talking about female friendships and social dynamics," she began. "What have you observed about how girls interact with each other compared to boys?" James thought about it. "I guess girls seem to talk more, and they're always hugging and stuff. Guys usually just punch each other on the arm or whatever." Grandma B nodded. "There's often more open emotional expression and physical affection in female friendships. But there can also be more complex social hierarchies and unspoken rules. Let's role-play a few scenarios." For the next hour, Grandma B guided James through various social situations, navigating group dynamics, offering emotional support to a friend, dealing with gossip and social exclusion. James found himself struggling to pick up on subtle cues and unspoken expectations. "This is exhausting," he complained, after fumbling through a scenario about how to respond to a backhanded compliment. "Why can't people just say what they mean?" "It's not always that simple." Grandma B explained. Women are often socialized to be indirect, to avoid conflict, to prioritize harmony in relationships. This can lead to more nuanced communication styles. She handed him a book on female psychology and social dynamics. Read through the first few chapters of this. It might give you some insight into why these patterns develop. As James delved into the book, he found himself fascinated and frustrated in equal measure. The complex web of social expectations, emotional labor, and unspoken rules that many women navigated daily was mind-boggling. He thought about all the times he'd dismissed girl drama as silly or overblown. Now he was starting to see how these intricate social dynamics could be both a source of support and stress. After lunch, Grandma B announced it was time for a field trip. "We're going to the local women's center," she explained as they got in the car. "They're having a support group meeting today, and the organizer has agreed to let you sit in and observe." James felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. "Are you sure that's okay? I mean, I'm not really—" "You're presenting as female and you're here to learn," Grandma B said firmly. "Just listen and observe. You might be surprised by what you hear." The Women's Center was a cozy, welcoming space filled with comfortable chairs and inspiring posters. James followed Grandma B to a room where about a dozen women of various ages were gathered in a circle. He sat down nervously, hyper-aware of his appearance, and hoping he wouldn't be called out as an imposter. As the meeting began, James found himself drawn into the stories and experiences shared by the women. They talked about struggles with work-life balance, body image issues, experiences harassment, the challenges of motherhood, and the pressure to be everything to everyone. Some stories were funny, some heartbreaking, but all were deeply human. One woman spoke about the conflicting messages she received growing up. Be smart, but not too smart or you'll intimidate men. Be pretty, but not too much, or you're asking for trouble. Be ambitious, but make sure you prioritize family. James thought about his own sister and wondered if she felt the same pressures. Another shared her frustration with always being expected to be the peacekeeper in her family, smoothing over conflicts and keeping everyone happy at the expense of her own needs. James shifted uncomfortably, remembering times he'd expected his mom to fix things without considering the emotional toll it might take on her. As the meeting wound down, James was lost in thought. He barely noticed as Grandma B thanked the organizer and led him back to the car. "What did you think?" she asked as they drove home. James was quiet for a moment, processing everything he'd heard. "It was intense," he finally said. "I had no idea women dealt with so much stuff, like, all the time." Grandma B nodded.
It can be overwhelming when you start to really see it all. But remember, women aren't just defined by their struggles. They're strong, resilient, and capable of amazing things.
Thanks for watching my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!